Hey there, this is Dr. Jason Shumard, author of The Thyroid Epidemic and How to Reverse Your Diabetes. And today I wanted to continue the conversation. So this is our part 2 series on toxicity. So I'm going to just review real quickly what I spoke about in part 1 for those of you who have missed part 1, but you can always go back and watch part 1 if you want to. Again, later on as we post it, that will be posted on our YouTube channel. So part 2 today, I want to go a little more in depth in this evaluation of toxicities and go into the specific toxins, the exposures, how you can be exposed, and how it can impact your body as well. So last time we spoke about the 3 common type of toxicities that we see in the practice: biotoxins. Bio meaning living, so it's a living organism that gets into your body and starts expelling toxins and causing a lot of chaos inside the body. Heavy metals. That there's multiple different types of heavy metals, and we'll talk about the specifics that we are most concerned with. And then we have the environmental toxins as well. So if we look at biotoxins, again, bio means living, it's a living organism that produces toxins. We have mold, we have MARCoNS, which is a multi-antibiotic resistance bacterial infection, and then we have Lyme disease. These are the 3 most common type of biotoxins that we specifically see. And then we look at the heavy metals, and we see lead, we see cadmium, mercury, and arsenic, and we'll talk about how these exposures, where we can get these types of exposures and how they can impact our body. And then we have our environmental toxins. So these are going to be things that you're exposed to by breathing the specific area you live in, for example, pollution, or types of, maybe you're in a farming industry, maybe you work in a farm where they're having lots of pesticides, those sort of things. We have our food. We have lots of toxins in our foods these days, and our food quality isn't as good as it used to be. And then the chemicals, right? As I mentioned, the toxins that are in our foods, the air that we breathe, those sort of things from a chemical component. And then our exposures. Why do we get exposed to these types of toxins? And they mainly occur from 2 components. Our genetics, right? So some of us have vulnerability to these types of toxins and how they impact our body genetically speaking, and the inability to get rid of these toxins once we're exposed. And then a huge one that we commonly see in the practice is individuals who have poor detoxification skills, meaning they get exposed to these types of toxins, and next thing you know, they can't get rid of them. So they're having a difficulty getting rid of them through the typical detoxification pathways: liver detoxification, gallbladder, intestinal tract through your feces, and also through urine. And also on top of that, our skin is a huge component for detoxification. So oftentimes people may get rashes, they may have bumps, itching, those sort of things happening. And typically in the traditional medical model, you're going to get a cream, a steroid, something like that, when in reality, it could just mean that your other detoxification pathways, your liver, gallbladder, gut function, kidney function, are decreased, not working. So the body's trying to get rid of it, so it's going out through the skin. So keep that in mind if you're oftentimes getting specific types of problems with your skin on a regular basis. So rashes, bumps, itchiness, pain, those sort of things. So now what I want to talk about today in this video is the types of exposures and how you can get exposed to these types of things and how it's impacting the body and can increase the risk of degenerative diseases. And so the common conditions that we work with in the office are type 2 diabetes, thyroid conditions and autoimmune conditions, and cognitive decline. So we'll be discussing how those types of conditions get impacted from these types of conditions. So let's go back to the beginning, and we'll start with biotoxins. Again, with biotoxins, there's 3 common ones that we see. We see mold, we see MARCoNS, and we see Lyme. So what's interesting though is that many people I talk to, they're like, I don't understand how I could be exposed to mold because I don't see any mold in my home. Well, that's a common misconception for a couple different things. Number 1, the current exposure may not be right now. Your exposure may not be at your home. Your home may be completely clean, but maybe you had an exposure to mold when you were in college, or maybe when you were younger, or maybe the multiple apartments you lived in throughout your life, or maybe another home. So oftentimes we can be exposed to these types of toxins, and they may not impact our health immediately, but the compounding of it over and over and over again, eventually starting to create issues that are creating symptoms. And this is a very important concept. I talk to people all the time thinking, oh, they're healthy, they feel good, so they must be healthy. Well, unfortunately, the body doesn't work that way. This is a progressive process, right? When somebody has a heart attack today, that's taken potentially a decade or more to get to that point. So that belief pattern of thinking I must be healthy because I feel good may not be the best way of really keeping an eye on our health and our overall function of our body. So for instance, in mold, the exposure could have been 15, 20, 30 years ago, and that mold exposure is just hanging out of your body over and over and over, and these toxins can be lodged up in your tissues and your fat tissues, adipose tissue, your muscles, and other tissues of your body. It just starts to kind of come out every once in a while, creating chaos until enough of the chaos occurs that the symptoms develop. So be open to these types of toxicities, because even though you may not see a problem currently in your home, it could be something you were previously exposed to. The other scenario that can happen that's very quite often that we see with mold is maybe you had a problem in the past. Maybe you had a flood in your bathroom or your kitchen or some other area of your home, and a remediation company came out and took care of that. But what's often not understood is when those mold spores are growing, they eventually become airborne. And when they become airborne, they start to float around your house to different areas of your home. So now those spores start to go to your living room, they start to go down the hallway to another bedroom, and so on. So maybe that specific area was treated, but those spores that started becoming airborne are now around your home. Now, once they get to a certain area, they're going to fragment into billions of pieces, and every single one of those pieces of fragmentation has the DNA of the mold. Eventually it starts to float down, gets behind your TV, gets on picture frames, on windowsills, on tops of door frames, on your walls. So those other areas haven't been treated. So now those fragments with that DNA is still there. You're breathing this in on a regular basis. So oftentimes, one of the things that we do is we have our patients doing home mold analysis, which is a very specific test, to see if they have that elevated DNA and the fragmentation in their home that can be correlating with their potential exposure. So you can kind of see how we start to get really deep into this evaluation of our practice members that we work with in our office. The other component we can see is MARCoNS. Now, MARCoNS is a multi-antibiotic multi-antibiotic resistant bacterial infection. So essentially, it's resistant to antibiotics. So even if you have the infection, you can't take an antibiotic. It has to be done through other treatment protocols. So really what this is specifically, you breathe it in, it gets into the sinuses here, and what happens is you start to develop a biofilm or a film around the infection, so your immune system can't penetrate it, can't address it. So next thing you know, it starts to proliferate, and maybe you get symptoms, but likely not in the sinuses, but it will create immunological symptoms and systemic inflammation. So you may have MARCoNS here in the sinuses, but it's creating neuropathy, or it's creating GI issues or adrenal issues or whatever else is going on to the body. So again, just because the infection here doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a symptom associated in that specific area. And then Lyme disease, obviously, most of us are familiar with Lyme. It's typically occurred from a tick bite, but it can happen from other areas as well, potentially like mosquitoes and other types of scenarios that Lyme can be exposed. But many individuals don't even know they've been exposed to Lyme until years, maybe decades down the road, when the symptoms start to arise. Lyme is a tricky little booger because it can hang out in your body for many, many years into the gastrointestinal system. Next thing you know, it proliferates and becomes problematic, and the person starts having extreme symptoms. So it's a common one that we'll see someone experiencing as well. All of these problems can be addressed through natural remedies, through natural protocols. It does not require pharmaceutical medication to address these types of problems. Some people may be using those, but they're not required based upon the protocols that we do, and we get phenomenal results. So this is going to give you an idea more about biotoxins and the potential exposures. So you may have a mold exposure going on inside your body, even though you may not see mold in your home. Be aware of that. MARCoNS, this is a common thing. This is usually going to happen because the person genetically is predisposed to having this type of condition. So it's more of a genetic problem usually. And then we have the Lyme situation as well, that anybody can actually be exposed to Lyme. But genetically speaking, people who are more predisposed to Lyme are going to have more symptoms, typically for most individuals. Now, the next type of toxin that we see is heavy metals. Now, there's 4 problematic heavy metals. These are the biggest issues that we see with individuals that are the most toxic to the body. So we have lead. Now, most of us understand how significant lead is to the body. Lead is the #1 neurotoxin. What a neurotoxin means, it breaks down your nerve cells, it causes destruction, so it can impact the brain, it can impact the nerves in your periphery, even in the central nervous system as well. So lead is a very toxic problem, and many people don't realize that lead exposure still can happen. So we can see lead has been shown in certain water components. We've recently had a situation here locally where there was lead found in the water supply. We can see it from people depending on the era where they come from, but previously we used to have paint that had lead exposure. So that could have been from houses, toys, and those are commonly that were occurring back in the day. Eventually those became outlawed and they stopped that. But if you were exposed to that, say like in the 50s, you had that exposure, that still could be in your body, right? Lead has a tendency to lodge itself into the bones of your body and hang out there for years. And then eventually over time, as the body starts making bone, or if someone's developing osteoporosis or osteopenia, starts leaching out into the bloodstream, next thing you know, exposing the person to these types of toxins, and then starting to break down things inside the body, causing symptoms. So we can see lead exposure from a couple different areas there that we may have been exposed to or are currently been exposed. This is a common one we see.